We've just come up to the top of the hour, and the title of today's webinar is Tune Up Your Contact Center Performance. So no matter how well you're doing in your current performance, we'll see if we can do some fine-tuning to make that better. Delighted to introduce to you our two presenters today. A regular, well-liked person within our webinar program, Martin Hill-Wilson. Welcome back, Martin.
Thank you very much.
And you're going to be looking at a range of different ideas on contact center performance.
Indeed.
And also delighted to welcome for his first CallCentreHelper webinar to Jeremy Straker from New Voice Media. Jeremy, welcome to you.
Thank you, Chauncey. Pleasure to be here.
Excellent. We'll also be doing interactive tips and questions from the audience, and we have a very stimulating discussion already going on within the chat room, where we're asking for people to describe the 5 functions that are 5 keywords that best describe your current role. We're also taking tips and questions, and we'll be awarding a bottle of champagne or box of chocolates for the best tip. If you'd like to use the hashtag tip in the chat room, and we'll announce that on Twitter following today's webinar. I'll ask Martin to be picking the winning tip from that.
Yes, looking forward to that.
So if you want a copy of the webinar slides, once you're logged into the chat room, here's the address at the top. Just put in your first name, last name, and then you can download the webinar slides there. So there's also a replay available later on this afternoon, callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars, and you can share the webinar with the rest of your team or with your management team if you'd like to do that. So I'd like to just going to be looking at tuning up your contact center performance. So just here's a poll question for you. How would you score your current contact center performance? Scale of 1 to 5. Is it 5, soaring with the eagles? 4, cooking on gas? Number 3, good in patches or patchy in others? Number 2, my old school report, could try harder? Or is it number 1, limping along? So if you'd just like to vote on how you would score your contact center performance, would be interesting. Let's have a look at some of the other keywords that we've had coming through. Maya said forward-thinking, passionate, inspiring, aware, and ways that she would describe her role. We've also got Laura, who says her 5 keywords: demanding, challenging, coaching, which I think is a great one, quality, and motivator. So let's have a look at the results and see how many people are soaring with the Eagles. And the score is only 3%. Currently, in terms of their performance, is soaring with the Eagles. 31% are cooking on gas. 57% are good in patches and patchy in others. 9% could try harder, and luckily we have no one who's sort of limping along there. So
everybody's A&E on this one.
So I think that's quite an interesting range. Maybe we're selecting people in terms of the title, Tune Up Your Performance. Would you expect to see perhaps a few more on the?
I think that's my experience would say that's pretty much spot on, actually. I think most people recognise they've got good bits, but they've got to join it all up together. Some people have got to a point where they're beginning to put the foot down now, you know, and really go some places. And I guess there's a really very small number that are really genuinely got it all together and making hay. I think that's a pretty good feedback.
Okay, well, we're going to do a bit of a drill down now, and we're going to ask you if you can type into the chat room, what is holding you back from better performance? So if you'd just like to type in 1 or 2 words in the chat room, what is holding you back from better performance? Is it budget? Is it staff problems? Is it management buy-in? So let's have a look. Cindy says funding. Laura says budget. Jeremy, quite interesting one here. Michael says better technology. Rachel also says technology. Catherine says technology. Mark has said it's culture, and particularly the culture, that's the way it's always been.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. Leo said it's sickness. Michael has said we're currently experiencing quite low staffing levels, always a challenge on the run-up to Christmas. Carla has said it's budget and technology. Craig has said it's technology. Casper has also said it's budget. I guess, Jeremy, that's always a challenge for people of you know, how to get hold of budget.
Yeah, absolutely. I think organisations have a lot of aspirations. They know what they want to achieve, but it's being able to find the money to do that. And clearly, if there's a business case that can be quantified, things become a little bit easier. So I think that's the lens people are having to look at it through.
Yeah. we'll certainly be doing a webinar next year on how to write a business case for new technology, which I think is going to be interesting.
Right.
Let's have a look at some of the other ones. Ian says management buy-in and the fear of failure. That's probably the worst fear you can have in business, is the fear of failure.
Yeah.
Can be quite good if it makes you get all your contingency plans together, but it can cause paralysis. Alison has said systems and culture. Power has said, Ava has said budget and technology. Mayor has said culture and budget. Hameshri has said staff and motivation. Michael has said looking at the call centre as an expense only.
Yes.
And that's quite an interesting one. It's sort of the marketing people, I think, are very good at being able to define what they do and put a quantifiable benefit on it. I think in the contact centre space, we're a bit behind the curve on that. So it tends to be we're just an expense, whereas actually, we perhaps called ourselves not contact centres, but customer retention centres, or you might then find that you could put a figure on that and show the how that could work.
Yep. Well, it's my old thing about making service sound as sexy as brand.
Indeed. So we've got a couple more comments, then we'll jump across. Lee has said increased call volumes are holding him back. Dawn has said managing contact levels across multiple platforms. It's certainly for a technology having to have multiple technologies is quite difficult. Martin has said comprehensive and joined up data and insight. I guess the challenge we've got, it's very similar to the multiple platforms, I guess. Yeah. And Glennon has said lack of investment in growth and development. So
and I would reckon that tracks back to the main comment that we're good in pieces but not in others. And the thing that's lacking is the unification through the tech.
Yeah, it's as you like. One of your key words was joining the dots.
That's it.
So I guess that's one of the things we need to do. Well, talk of joining the dots. What better time now than to pass the baton across to Martin, who will be hopefully providing us with a presentation that is provocative and inspiring at the same time.
Well, in a collaborative way with my colleague next door, of course. We're going to do it together. This one. So, topic is tune up the contact centre. And I actually spent some time looking for this picture, and I just want to dwell on the picture for a wee while, because it's difficult to find an image, which kind of fits it. And I eventually found that one, and I thought, that's really nice, because it shows the fact that really a contact centre is quite like a piano with many, many, many different notes in it, all of which have got to be in tune, and then from which you can produce something really quite wonderful, the music bit. Yeah. And that is a strong metaphor for our contact centre industry. It is a collection of pieces, and unless it's pretty much tightly integrated, it's a mess. At the end of the day. So I think beyond possibly the original sense of tuning it up, there is definitely a sense of making it more harmonious as well.
Which is a bit like the Morecambe and Wise sketch. Say, I am playing all the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order.
Yeah, exactly. And some of virtuoso. I like it. So let's start off with an old chestnut of ours, a favourite, personalisation. It's a topic that we've addressed a number of times across the year, and indeed you're probably likely to come across it quite a lot, whichever seminar or conference you're at these days. It's big in marketing, it's big in digital transformational conversations, and it needs to be big in our space as well. In fact, I would suggest the main thing about personalisation is that we're behind the curve, in fact. And if we discount, I think, a very important element, which is how the individual can personalise the experience, which is where we've always scored. Eventually I'll deal with your problem, John T. Let me find out about it. I think we need to get better than that, because that's often too far downstream, quite frankly, and we need to sort of make it more systemic, our ability to recognise customers and deal with them in smarter ways as far as that's concerned. So let's hit it from that perspective, and I suppose underneath all of that we're going, do you really know me at the end of the day? And that applies in many, many ways of call centre experience, because, I mean, call centres, as we know, is all about treating vast numbers of people. And the trouble is, do you actually remember who I am, certainly across a case? If I deal with you on a regular basis, is there any sense that we're getting to know each other? And by the way, can you even remember in a single call who I am, particularly if you transfer me? So often that doesn't even take place. And there must be something that we can do to make that better. And I think one of the things there is the fact that we've already collected a lot of information about you, and we are, quite frankly, rather lazy about that. And so we can do a great deal upstream, getting you to the right resource, if we think more about the needs, expectations, etc., etc. And of that whole set of things that we've got there sitting on the screen, I'd like to start off with what ought to be table stakes at this stage in the game, which is the fact we collect information in CRM. Why the heck are we not using it? And I know that this is something that you are spending quite a lot of time, isn't it, at the moment, talking to people out on the road, as being an advantage that they could bring together for the customer experience, but isn't curiously very often done, is it?
It's not. It's clear to us all as consumers that businesses have spent a huge amount of money delivering online experiences that are highly personalised and highly relevant. But there's still this big disconnect that exists between kind of the digital online world and the experience I have from that same brand when I pick up the phone and talk to them.
Yeah, it's weird.
And they've got all the information. Yeah. They're using it in one channel. They're just not using it when I call them.
Yeah.
And that seems like the opportunity that's not being taken advantage of at the moment.
I don't know why. I mean, I put the blame to a degree on a cultural thing. So I talk about inside out, outside in. In other words, you can't be bothered to imagine my situation, you know, so therefore you don't use the right data to route me. And I wonder how many of us are still organising our resource planning on the very simple equation which says the first person, you know, goes to the first available within a general thing called skills management. But there's nothing more sophisticated, and that's how we've done our routing, and that's it. But we don't really extend our imagination and say, what have we... I mean, here's a question for people. Do people really know what they've collected in the CRM? Yeah? How would you quantify that? I don't mean the number of records, but insight-wise or profile. Have we got half a profile built, a whole profile? If you dipped into it, what could you infer about a customer? You know, as a general aggregate persona. I bet most people don't know that.
So if you'd like to put into the chat room, what profile information can you collect from your CRM system?
Or from what you already have, what could you infer?
Or what can you infer?
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the question. So how does this stuff work that we've got here on the screen, Jeremy? Because this is interesting stuff for me.
Yeah. So it's interesting because if you've got information about your customer, and most companies do, you can generally understand why someone might be calling you. So it's kind of like know who I am and know why I might be calling. So, I mean, I've got examples I could share across most industries, but you know, a common one that comes up in the insurance marketplace is if somebody calls you within 2 weeks of their car insurance being due, then there's a good chance they're calling about car insurance.
Guess what?
They're renewal, right? So why would you even ask them to select whether they're a new customer or an existing customer, or calling about a claim or calling about their renewal, when there's kind of a 90% chance you know what they're calling about. So kind of use that data and do something with it.
So this is the whole emerging discipline of predicting, isn't it? Yeah, we're hearing that word coming up lots. I think last year we talked a lot about proactive, which again is the same difference as far as I'm concerned, which is what do we know about the customer and where can we send them, which is a better place for them to be as a result of knowing that before they have to make the effort. Yeah, at the end of the day. So what have we got here of examples? I guess VIP, that's talking about you matter to us, we're going to treat you in a different way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That would be great. Open cases, I've got to say, if I'm dealing with something which is complicated and I need to engage with you, what, 2 or 3 times? It would be fantastic if maybe I dealt with the same person, you know.
Well, this is a common use case. It's not just about dealing with the same person for consistency of interaction. It's about also reducing friction and reducing customer frustration. You know, if the business knows that I've already phoned them 3 times this week, then if I phone a 4th time, then clearly there's an ongoing issue. And as a consumer, I'm likely to get more and more frustrated. So using that information in an intelligent way, playing a message to the caller, acknowledging the issue, and then actually doing something different with that call is kind of transformational in terms of how the customer feels about how they're treated.
So I know I can think of 2 or 3 organisations at the moment that are doing big transformational CRM stuff. You know, a lot of people are spending money again. And one would hope that as that goes and happens, it's not then just used in a very reactive way, but some of the intelligence that's sitting there already could be used for better, smarter routing. Yeah.
The exciting thing is that it's down to the organisation themselves on how creative they want to get with this stuff. Right?
Yeah, exactly. What they want to recognise as an individual. It's dynamic segmentation in a way, isn't it? It's saying this type of customer with this kind of need, let's treat them in this way.
So we've had some answers to your question on profiling. Michael says profiling is something that's on the horizon for us. Glenn says, well, the profiler, doesn't that really depend on what type of campaign you're running? We've got Cindy who says, we're currently in a B2B environment, and agents get all pending job states and inquiries when they get the caller's name.
Yeah.
The bigger challenge is in the form of B2C environment overall. We have Casper who says we do profiling based on current engagement, payment record, and contact history.
Yes.
And Craig who says we have a company-wide identity project to look at a single customer view, which will really move us along when we look to introduce CRM, so sort of very much work in progress. And Cindy, there's quite an interesting comment, says sometimes the challenge is getting the agent to use the information that we provide.
Sure thing.
In terms of the profile.
Sure thing. Well, again, that doesn't happen by accident. I don't know that enough training takes place saying, now we do have this available on the screen, what would you use it for?
Yeah.
Etc. So there's different ways of using it. There is ignoring it completely, which is a real not very good thing to do, and you use it for mail shots. I mean, that's a pathetic low level. Then I think there's the level of the screen, which is useful when the person can customize. But then the thing that should be happening, which is what this slide is really talking about, is further upstream. We bake it into the way that we distribute that call to the right resource, or we know something about the person. So I would like to suggest that ought to be, for next year, increasingly table stakes as opposed to something that's new. The other bit, just to move on a bit then from there, is to say, you know, it's really interesting what else you can learn about people from very, very public domain information, particularly the demographics of life. And this was a piece of work done in the States, so I'll say this up front. I don't know how this necessarily translates into a UK psyche, but the thinking behind it, I think, is absolutely on the money. And it says something which is, in fact, intuitive to us, which is that based on your age, you probably want to have a different pacing in terms of the way you're communicated to. And what they're simply saying is younger people can process quicker, probably slightly more impatient, if that's not too much of a stereotype. And as we get older, we want to have the rapport done at a slightly slower pace. Now, I think that happens naturally, one would hope, in a call centre, but it's just interesting to get that research and recognise that, and then to say, well, are we therefore sending people of a certain age to, therefore, certain kinds of people? Because age is quite often collected as something essential. I mean, I've been working a lot with housing associations recently. They all collect the age of the people sitting in there. So you've got a real benefit if you've got that available to you. There you go, just went through that one. Another strange connection point, which they've uncovered in this piece of research, is to say, in fact, we prefer to speak to people of a similar age. And yet this, and what they discovered was this is most prevalent with people who are living in an urban context. I don't know the reasons for that, but they discovered that's quite strong in terms of their research. So again, if you can somehow, maybe for the postcode, zip code, recognize where people are living, maybe there is a propensity that they want to report to the same age groups, if that kind of research holds out in your context. Here's another one, and this is, by the way, I think, starting to look to some of the future stuff. As I was doing some more research to make sure, as Jonty said, I never cover the same topic again, I dug in a bit further, and I was surprised to find there's 2 or 3 new companies popping up now who are hovering around of the much broader area of routing. And what they're doing is bringing to bear analytics and some of the psychology. And what they are noticing is that if you can put always-on analytics in your call center environment, one of the areas you can tune it into listening is the business of how people communicate. And you can use grammar and language to indicate a kind of personality that is associated with that particular choice of grammar and language. And as you can see here, they've now reduced that into an operational frame whereby an outbound person who has also been listened to can therefore be paired more accurately to people that he or she is on the same wavelength. Now, we've done it intuitively, we do NLP, and we talk in those terms, but here's another example about how it's done in probably a much broader way and probably on an ongoing way, yes, such that you get better sales results at the end of the day. And I just thought that was really interesting. Yeah, so it's another thing that we can put into the mix as a smart way of doing stuff.
I think just on that point, Martin, if you talk about kind of pairing around appropriateness, if I may kind of share an example from one of our customers.
Yes.
And it's an example from the travel industry. And if you think about when people are looking to book their summer holiday or book a once-in-a-lifetime trip, it's quite a significant purchase and it's quite emotionally important to them. And then if you think about the people who often work at these travel companies, they're keen travellers themselves, and actually they spend a lot of time travelling and visiting a lot of these resorts, either as part of their job or part of their personal interests. And if you think about the way this kind of surfaces itself by connecting a caller who's interested in booking a safari to an agent who's recently been on a safari, you're kind of doing two things. You're making it a more comfortable booking experience for the caller, and you're also increasing the propensity to secure that booking by connecting them to someone who can empathise on that trip of a lifetime.
I think that's really interesting. And actually, that principle could be applied all over the place, which is that I work for X company, am I using that company's services, in which case can that experience be matched to people asking me questions? I think that's a really good route. Yeah, that's very interesting.
It impacts the customer, but it also drives business results in terms of...
Well, it's also personally motivating from the advisor, isn't it, perspective? I'm talking about something I'm passionate about and interested. That's got to reflect well. Okay, so there's a few examples.
I've just been asking the poll question, how advanced are your own personalised strategies? They behind the examples provided, on a par with the examples provided, ahead of the examples provided. So I think that we've got most people have been voting that in the background.
What do you reckon?
So let's...
what's your guess? Oh, is it too late? Where do you think you're going to be?
From the interactions I have on a day-to-day example, there you go. I would have said probably a little bit behind.
Right.
A lot of companies I'm talking to have aspirations of getting there, but are struggling to get to that kind of destination.
So I'm being provocative to say it's table stakes for next year.
I think on the scoring of performance in terms of personalisation, I think that definitely fits into the could try harder category there.
So that's very interesting how slow we are as an industry. I'm coming back to the point you made originally. It is tough to get budget. I absolutely understand the point. But if we're this far behind on our marketing colleagues, it doesn't work from the brand's perspective to have one touch point so out of tune with the other ones, does it? And I just wonder whether or not we ought to factor that more general point into the background, which is actually we're part of an overall experience and we're lagging relative to the online. Therefore, we need the ability to. And I think that's a legitimate part of the argument.
Good.
Okay, interesting. Thanks for everyone sharing that one. Now, next one. Oh, here we go. Always a favourite topic for everybody. And talking about this as being a way in which you can tune up your call centre. So it's an interesting exercise, even if you lack the precise data to quantify it, to spend some time with your colleagues trying to paint a picture of how much demand failure sits in your overall mix. Because obviously, if you can squeeze that out and get rid of that, the volume goes down and you also increase the customer experience. I mean, it's one of those win-win situations at the end of the day. And because it's tough to do this, by the way, and we've always been getting rid of demand failure in one form or the other, it's a smart thing to get an overview. So get your current thing, ask yourself your question, how much does that cost, what value you're delivering, and then have a think about how much you could reduce it. So there's two areas. This is the obvious one, which I would say is simple demand failure, where you've got things like second, third time resolution, you've got complaint going on, you might even have an explosion on social customer service, anything like that. Clearly, this is a silly thing to be doing. So there's that element to it. And then there's a slightly more subtle one, which is we still have to sometimes sit in that queue waiting to talk to somebody live. Now, that has a degree of effort in it if I could have provided it as a self-serve, so it was available to be instantly 24/7. Now, it's a more subtle version of life, but that's equally the notion of convenience matters to me as well. So, within that context, let's look at ways to reduce the effort. In other words, make it more simple, make it easy as far as the experience is concerned. And again, I would ask folk to think about this, whether or not you've got bits of this in place or got the whole thing up and running. And to me, this is a conversation about joining the dots.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, on this slide, I would reckon that a lot of us can go, yeah, we do the mystery shop, we do the top 50 or something of that nature. Some of us might say, yeah, we do the post-interaction stuff, we've got the IVR, or we've got a text-based version, we get good participation from customers. I can say absolutely clearly that as far as advisor feedback is concerned, the work we're doing in performance and quality, 100 people we've done now, I think, 100 brands, haven't had one that has been doing that until we've suggested it. And that's really extraordinary. I'm sure that's purely cultural. People are there to pick up a call and talk to people. They're not there, to give feedback about what's the best and the worst of the customer experience. Hugely missed opportunity. So I'm seeing that now being something people are doing. Anyway, all of those sources, and it's not a question, by the way, of there's just one killer app. I mean, if you're just doing NPS and say our score is, therefore we know our customer's voice and experience, that's dangerous. And I think voice of the customer is just like actually GPS on a smartphone. You need to have 2 or 3 different satellites triangulating so you know where your location is. I'd argue the same thing. And probably the most graphic one is if you get something from the staff and you get something from customer, compare those 2 realities. That's the most interesting thing in the first instance, and that gets you up and running. So the maturing of that so that you've got a good signal to noise ratio is dead important. That's the first thing, and I think I'm seeing progress on that.
And Catherine has said also a good source of feedback is quality coaches as well, because the quality coaches actually are doing it from a sort of a range of different advisors, so they get to see this sort of and doing lots of listening, so they get an idea of where the common ground is starting to.
Well, I tell you what, one of the, I won't say who it is because they've got a little advantage here, so I won't spoil it for them, but a well-known large utility company decided that one little intervention they could do on this was just to put a little online form together and ask the staff to say, was I able to solve the problem, or was it outside my control because something upstream or downstream? And 2 weeks in, they've got 43% participation, and based on their volumes, that's a lot of data they're collecting. And the other colleague who's working on it with them on the P&Q is then in the customer experience design team. So interestingly, she owns the journeys. So all this data now is going both to the quality teams for individual coaching, fantastic, lots of stuff, and then straight through to the design team. And they're getting a wealth of incremental little bits and pieces coming through from that. And of course, it's beginning to paint the picture which departments. So it's a laborious way of doing analytics, but it's very effective underneath the radar just to get up and running. So, yes, back to the point. Huge opportunity there. So feedback is one thing. Then what are you doing with it? And that little loop there, listen, interpret, redesign, if you know something there is there already, or invent if it's something new, pilot, learn, and improve. I would suggest we don't do that well. Now, if you go and talk to the VOC, the voice of the customer industry, they will say, right now, we are good at listening, and then we suddenly stop. We collect it, we don't do anything with it, which is a real shame. Also, there are teams out there. Continuous improvement is not new. Agile isn't new. Lean isn't new. TQM certainly isn't new. So there's different generations of the same thing. The question is, are they embedded in a way that works for the contact center? Do you run your own team there? You're reliant upon a central thing? Should you be getting yourself involved as part of business as usual, which I would suggest is a good thing to do? And are you rigorous in that approach? Does it involve other colleagues in other parts of the business? And have you got senior people playing referee when the decision-making gets tough? When the decision-making gets tough. And that, I would suggest, in today's world of where we're trying to go, is absolutely essential. There is no way you can get better unless you take problems off the table. And problems don't go off the table just by coincidence. No. It's the 1,000 incremental points of it. And so, in fact, somebody this morning said from one of the retail companies, he said, I'm a big fan of just doing 1% improvement in tons of areas and discovering by the end of the year I've done 17% or something. And he said, that's actually what we're doing right now, and it's working a treat. So you've got to be pretty rigorous about that particular approach. So are you doing that? Are you investing in that? Do you recognize that particular problem? And back to a point I have made many times, if you are, suddenly you're no longer, who said it earlier, a cost. You're much more valuable. You're a source of intel, feeding other people's agendas. That's where we have a chance to become much more strategic as an industry. So, hugely important point there. So, just to hammer that out, taking effort out of getting stuff done for the customer is absolutely the fastest way to get a better CX score at the end of the day. So, here we go, another little question for you to reflect on. Where do you see you're at as far as this is concerned? Are you an organisation that still needs a prompt, like a major incident or a particularly serious complaint, to go, oh, yeah, we must get better, and then you kick into the gear, the fire engine? Have you got to the point where you believe in the benefits of collecting ongoing feedback, but guess what, you don't use it very well? Have you done that and you are now using it? Possibly even cleverer than that is you're doing that, but you've also integrated and are collecting the advisor feedback. And if you're a total ninja, you're doing all of that stuff, and you can see it being improved elsewhere, and you're listening in the call centre. They're going, do you know what? We had that problem 9 months ago. We spotted it. We got the team to work on it. And if we look at it today, our customers are not saying that's an issue for us any longer. So we're able to track the eventual ping as it goes around the universe. That's a pretty high advanced level. So where do you reckon you are on that choice?
So let's have a look at the results that have come in, then we can jump across to the chat room and have a look at the discussion.
I've got an idea of where this one's going to land. We'll see whether I'm right.
Let's share the results up on the screen. So 33% are making improvements after major incidents or complaints.
Yes.
35% collect ongoing customer feedback but don't use it well. 20% collect ongoing customer feedback and use it effectively, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, that's correct.
8% is above but also collect and use it for advisor feedback, and 5% as above but also track the impact of making changes.
Yes. I wonder if that's still the same 3% we saw on that first one.
Yeah, it could well be in terms of the self-scoring.
Where did you think that was going to be?
I thought it was going to be more the other way around, actually. I thought it was going to be more in the middle, and maybe a few more people collecting and using advisor feedback.
Yeah.
It just seems like there's been so much conversation over the last 5-6 years around collecting customer feedback, NPS, customer effort scoring.
Yeah.
I kind of felt we'd be more weighted towards people are doing it more thoroughly than they are.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? I actually thought it was going to be more there, but that's only because I'm talking a lot with call centres. It's about the quality management stuff and how do you make improvements, and everybody's still back in the dungeons, actually, in terms of getting on. But that's encouraging. We've got 20% there.
So we're jumping across to the chat room now, and where Rachel is looking at all the conversations coming in. And have we got any tips, questions, or audience opinions, Rachel?
We've got a bit of everything, actually, Jonty. Cindy actually says, the best tip I can give is to take advantage of the chat room. Makes these webinars the best.
Oh,
hey, well done you.
I like that, but I would like that, wouldn't I?
So we have an opinion from Alison. She says, we have customer profiling information. Customer needs open cases, but some agents are not good at personalising contacts using this info.
Right.
I guess that's always a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Got another tip by David36. We've used intelligent routing in a sales environment to match the customer demographic with the most appropriate agent.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I wonder what that matching is based on in terms of the whether that's skill set or whether that's by value or have you got any opinions, Jeremy, on the best way of doing that?
It'll be interesting to know if this example is B2B or B2C.
Well, demographic, what's that going to be? That's going to be age, gender.
Yeah, it's more likely to be B2C.
Or location in the country.
Well, David, let us know, actually. That would be fascinating. Okay.
Fair. So Rachel says, I believe analytics should be driving your quality training and customer experience programs.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Another tip from Cindy who says profiling can be useful information, but agents need to realise each caller is different and may not fit into standard profile. We need to recognise and respond to individual callers.
That's the second or third comment we've had on a similar one. It strikes me there may be some sort of either a cultural issue there or there's some sort of training need that being able to for the technology to identify a profile is fine.
Yeah.
But if people are sort of kind of happy on this is the script I always use, going off-piste and then building that up is
well,
quite
you're
different.
right, because most of us are still either in scripts or guidelines at best, and the whole mindset around it is stick to it. So improvisation in that sense, and being supported in the quality feedback that well improvised given the situation I heard you were in, I don't think many people have comfortable being there yet. One thing, just, I don't know, I'm slightly sort of joining dots which aren't there necessarily, but maybe next year, Jonty, we could have some time spent on new approaches to training. Because I think a lot of this is requiring new behaviour, and it still mystifies me as an industry why we put 6 weeks in right at the beginning of someone's induction, and then you're very lucky if you get any more training for the rest of your time. And I think that's a completely outmoded way of doing things, and we need to rethink how we energise continuous development of people.
Yeah, I think it would be very interesting to have a look at.
Yeah.
We've had some feedback. David actually said it was B2C. So in response to his, it was this one.
Right, okay.
B2C.
Yeah.
And as a final one, Rachel says, I think customer effort helps you gain management buy-in. Putting yourself in your customer's shoes, showing the effort it takes, helps bring customer pain to life.
Sure, absolutely. In fact, the old techniques of still playing a tape, a digital archive, whichever version you want, up to the board of the customer experience absolutely still works.
Thank you very much for that, Rachel. So, Martin, if you'd like to
yes.
carry on with your thoughts.
So we were on multi-channel. We're just coming into multi-channel. Point to make about multi-channel is that although it's all the rage, it has not really been all the rage until really quite recently, if you take a sort of 20, 30-year perspective. And Steve Morell's work over at Contact Babel illustrates this perfectly well. If you take a couple of data points in his annual surveys, you can see that the movement over 10 years in terms of the decline of voice in favour of other things hasn't really been very dramatic. And although we get all excited about the latest and greatest channels, and we were discussing today, the impact that Facebook Messenger may or may not have on life, in reality, the hippest channel that was happening in 2013 was email. Admittedly, by 2014, we'd begun to see some volume around of web chat, which a lot of people have been spending time on, a titchy amount as far as social is concerned, but voice still apparently holding up very strongly. Now, this is research collected from the volume of activity from the call centres, but if you then flip it to a comment that Steve made this year, which is now asking consumers themselves, I just thought the difference in that very short space of time was absolutely dramatic. And I have never known Steve to be anything other than very conservative and sober in his language, and yet he's saying only 12% of consumers prefer voice. I mean, that's a heck of a statement to make. There we go. And so we're beginning to see fantastic change in a very short space of time. And the point I want to make about that is that none of us, therefore, have got a track record in it. Now, if you go out there, there's undoubtedly contact centres and individuals that have pioneered chat. I mean, I'm sure if we had the Who's Best at Chat competition, 2014, 2015, we could find some fierce competition for some people that have done a really genuinely great job on that and know how to leverage it in a service environment, a sales environment. I've seen it for myself, and it's impressive. But if you then step them back into the bigger context, which we're selling at the moment, called cross-channel, multi-channel, omni-channel, or whatever, and you say, give me people that have really strung all that stuff together, understand how it works and have delivered it, it's going to be a very short list, I reckon, at this point in time. So telling the truth on that and not feeling that you don't know where you're at, really, I think is a dead important point.
Yeah.
Because that's where we really are. And so you still see language like this. And again, depending how Jonty and myself go back a wee while in terms of hearing this story, in terms of systems integration, but there's always something new next year, isn't there? Voice is going to die because something else is going to die because this type of person will never do this in the end of the day. And in reality, apart from telex, which has been the only thing I've seen in 30 years that has disappeared, it's a proliferation of choice rather than a swapsy of choice at the end of the day. So, just a wee bit of wisdom around this, which is possibly worth sharing. If I know you've got your business cases where you're probably tempted to say, oh, do you know what, it's cheaper to do it this way, therefore we should argue we shall do it this way. In reality, the uptake of a channel is going to be based on its appropriateness, whether or not it does what the customer needs it to do. And it's a good thing to go back to some basics here and remember that communication can occur in a number of different ways, face-to-face, back down to texting. And you could think about it in terms of communication bandwidths. Clearly, if we could afford it, the best way to do it in life is virtually. Face-to-face. Why? Because, I mean, even this thing, which is meant to be just listening, we've even got our video because it augments it, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yeah.
Yeah, it does. So we know that, and that's the next best way of getting face-to-face. And if you are face-to-face, you know, as me as a presenter, I'm looking all the time to my audience, and the clearest clue is if I've got eyeballs which are closed, I'm in trouble. That's my feedback loop. Yes, and that happens all the time as far as that's concerned. And if you've got a complicated discussion to have with somebody, it's best if you're there. And so therefore, you've got trade-offs as you go into, as you lose things. So you lose body language if you go from face-to-face. Video, by the way, has interestingly seeing a bit of resurgence. I saw a fantastic presentation from Nationwide Now that are using that to sell mortgages. And that's because in that situation, buying a house has got to be what, the most expensive thing you buy? And I would imagine that if you can see the person, you build the trust quicker, don't you? Yep. And therefore it works to do it in that context. Now it's expensive, that expertise, so you virtualize it, etc. And so therefore that's important. Now what happens when you lose the facial feedback? Well, you've still got voice. And voice, I think, although we want to move away from it, we should remember just how amazing voice is, because of course it's still got the intonation. And the other weird thing is, maybe you can explain this as a technologist. I'm noticing this. On a call where I'm talking to somebody, the silencers are in many respects as powerful as the content. Isn't it true that you can hear the other person, even when there's nothing going on? You can sense someone's boredom. You can sense someone's anger or frustration. Now, explain, how does that work in SIP and VoIP terms over infrastructure? How does that happen? That's weird, isn't it? That's completely strange. And yet, it's the truth, which is why voice keeps being the reference channel, because it's so flexible and it's so powerful still at the end of the day. And interestingly, when you lose tone of voice and that realness, and you get back down to text, there was a stat I gave this morning, which is 72% of 18 to 24-year-olds are now more comfortable using emojis to communicate experience than writing it.
Wow.
So I asked the question of the audience, so how up are you on your emoji customer service? To which but it's an interesting point that as we have become more text-based, which is true, we have to reinsert experience through visualization, like hieroglyphics. And that's why they're so popular.
It'd be interesting to know if anyone in the audience is actually using emojis in their contact center, and whether you actually encourage it or discourage it.
Because my bet is, you can't do emojis, like you can't go on social. You know, the conversation, you can't do that because it's too dangerous. I bet nobody is allowed to do emojis. In fact, if anybody is, let's hear it. Let's hear it. So the point, interestingly, is it's horses for courses, is what I'm trying to argue here. Know the strength of the channel and know the task at hand. So, very quick, video, great for high-value sales where trust in brand flows from having a trust in the individual. And if you can just see through that slide at the back, those are the statistics and also the image of what Nationwide Now is doing. It's a great thing if you get to see them in action. I'd also say, although I don't know if they're doing it yet, patient and medical expert. Again, where I have a difficult discussion to be had, seeing that person could make a real difference for me to disclose. So I reckon that's a good use case. Voice, we all know, resolving issues, problem solving, relationship building, complaint management. Basically, those scenarios are when it's complex, when it's emotional, when it matters, use voice. And that's why it will never disappear from. But text is also equally good when we need to explain how to do something where it's relatively simple. Where, again, it's a question relating to something both of us can see. It's not a matter of disputing, it's just where is it on the page sort of thing. Simple advice, like where to find something on a website. And also, and incredibly importantly, it's a great escalation channel from online. Now, I'm not suggesting, by the way, that if you suddenly find yourself in an emotional, complex situation over chat, you should immediately freak out, run away. What I am saying is you've just got great danger of it not ending up in a good place because of the limitation of that channel at the end of the day. And so as far as our channel management is concerned and the mix, you should be thinking about customer situations, the complexity or otherwise of the task, and which channel is best matched to that. That's some of the inputs that you've got to put there.
So we've got some quite interesting feedback on the emojis. Cindy says we discourage it.
Yes.
Catherine says we use them when replying to tweets and replying to Facebook messages from our customers. So I guess that's very much matching the customer's style of language. Rachel says, I think, again, it depends on the medium. Emojis on Twitter and Facebook are acceptable. Emails and general chat, not so much so. Craig says we encourage use of emojis to reinforce what's been said.
Yeah.
Which he's put with a little smiley face. Sarah says you can use them in a chat environment, smiley faces, thumbs up, etc. But they're obvious warnings, so they need to be used in an appropriate way. And Maya said we use them in live chats to make the conversation more fun and more personal, but sending a frowny face when advising someone their refund is declined is not to be recommended.
Absolutely not.
So there's also channel appropriateness.
Yes.
Because if I was face to face with someone, I wouldn't wink at them and stick my thumb in the face. But if I'm talking to them on Twitter, I may do. Yeah.
You're right. So back to my point. What's the professional standard on emoji use?
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's written the book on that yet.
No.
So
That sounds like a good article for CallCentreHelper.
Yes,
next year.
absolutely plum for you guys. Absolutely plum. So a couple of principles coming out of that. Number one, don't think about channels. Think about the journeys that your customers are involved in, the tasks in those journeys. Channels, I'm sorry to say, are never going to go away. So if you're trying to argue that you're going to introduce a channel to kill another one, it may get you the business case, but in truth, it's unlikely to be true. And what your mix is, don't please go and say, oh, everybody's got this mix, therefore we must. Understand what your customer situation is, because it should be based on customer tasks. So that's the third principle. Now, we did arrive at the chat room somewhat early, actually, so should we flip over that and just hit our last area, Tomsy?
Across the chat room? Yeah, we'll go and have a quick look at what's going on there. I'll just pass the baton across to Rachel. So, Rachel, what have we got coming through in the chat room?
Well, actually, Catherine's just written for a tip, write a book on use of emojis. So that one's live there.
There's a great article on that. So
yeah. Okay. So we've got a tip from Michael who says, in reference to training, I found that doing basic training first, putting agents on the phone with support, and then bringing agents back for more complex training has improved performance and retention of agents.
Yes. So spend that initial period of time more intelligently and spread it out over time to better reflect the learning patterns of people. Absolutely.
Yeah. Mia says it can be frustrating sometimes when we have, by using the customer feedback, pinpoint the issue and not have the resources to fix it.
I guess that's a real challenge, actually, because it's, that's one of the things, once you start getting into analytics, you get this wealth of information about everything that's going wrong, and you can very quickly get sort of 500 problems we need to solve, and so it's very easy to get sort of a kind of paralysis on it. And what I see is that sort of the best companies are those that say, okay, of all those issues, here's the 3 that we're going to, or even just here's 1 per month we're going to go off. And I think you mentioned about just those 1% improvements of actually just starting with the most common one.
Well, part of the skill is once you've listened and you've got your pile, interpret. And part of the interpretation is to talk about what's doable, what's short-term, what's the big stuff, what are we going to tackle, what's our capacity for that. There's a whole set of skills in the middle of that. Yeah.
Fab. And well, a last tip before we go back from Cindy. It's important to realise that your best call handlers may not be good at other channels. If we're going to cross-utilise staff for multi-channel work, we need to hire and train for that.
Correct.
I see this quite a lot, actually, where organisations are moving into supporting multiple channels, and kind of battling with the fact that they hire people who are good at written skills but not not confident on the phone and vice versa, and kind of building in inefficiencies within their business because of that. So they're looking to drive efficiency by having people managing multiple challenges but have hired in a different direction.
Well, even within text, I mean, I know when I'm taking people and giving them introductory training on how to be good on social, and they've done email, they've got to cure themselves. And dear madam, it has come to our attention on the 31st of, you know, and you've wasted the whole thing. And you just got it there immediately. So I think some of the answer is just because the technology allows blending hasn't actually resulted in a lot of people doing it because of the problems in skill base. And I do think that there is an opportunity for an Uber agent, if you have a career path that says, let's really challenge ourselves to be good in the domain of, I mean, the domain of video is going to be different from the domain of text, from the domain of voice.
And certainly when you start about multi-skilling across channels, you've got to be very careful, because you may have people working with you in an environment who are, for instance, dyslexic, where chatting on the phone is quite a good career move to do that, as long as it's not over reliant on the, you know, if you've got check boxes and fine. But, you know, start to put onto web chat might cause all sorts of problems, including, you know, agent churn, because people might think, oh, that's not for me. I'm gonna move on.
Well, I think it all depends. I mean, the advent of mobile text apps, the Just app, WeChat out in China, Facebook, that stuff is not actually just text. You can do the lot in it. And if we as consumers start to use that lots, which we are already amongst ourselves, and flip between channels to get stuff done, then start to expect brands to be able to relate to us in that way, I'm talking a couple of years now before that gains mass, we will then have to follow suit, because we may well have advisors that have to flip between text and possibly voice, and if it really escalates up to something else, all in the course of solving a problem. And then that will mean that we're in a different game. But we're not there yet, but the tech, well, that's been around for a while now, actually, that capability, but it's a question of whether or not it gets mass adoption.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Rachel. We'll hand across to Martin, if you'd like to...
Our last topic,
your thoughts.
Motivation. Let's hit that very quickly. So, motivation. That really does drive tune-up more than anything else. And I just want to share something that we've been using in the performance and quality workshops, because I think it works. It speaks to people, and I wanted to share it with a broader audience. So this is a simple way of characterizing the kind of person that you don't want, and sometimes the kind of person that finds themselves on the wrong side of enjoying their job. And in an environment where it's all to do with volume, in an environment where often we're still a cog in a wheel, it's very easy for us to simply turn up to work from a sort of a mindset perspective of going, what's the point really, and to be very negative about life. Guess what you then see a lot of, guess what you then have to do, which is to blame, and the feedback from the universe tends to be critical as a result of that. Now, that was really the reverse of this one, which I originally drew, because we were doing work on what motivates people as part of the refresh on performance and quality, and some people have seen that Dan Pink piece of work, which he did now 3 or 4 years back, but he said, unless you're literally getting people to put, I don't know, sandwiches in a box and there's nothing else going on, money does not drive motivation. That said, you have to actually pay people enough so it doesn't become a point of issue, but the things that really drive people is autonomy, purpose, and mastery was his particular language. So out of that, I translated it into saying we really got to be much better at explaining what we're doing. So simply said, what are we doing in customer service at the level of purpose? A water company does an incredibly important job. An insurance company helps people recover from unforeseen situations in their life. That's a noble cause, that's great. That's meta-purpose. What are you connected into? That gives you meaning, drives energy, releases the extra bit which we notice, which is then fed through recognition. And the point I was making about that is you really should have a situation where your team leaders understand that psychology. And my point is, if they don't get that, in their own words, by the way, we're not being too didactic, unless they can see the points of connection, they really shouldn't be in charge of people. Because that's the way in which you drive great performance at the end of the day. And seeing all the changes that we've got going down in the future, we absolutely need more of that. And by the way, the other skill there is to convert people from the negative back to the positive. And those people that are just going to stay in the negative pot, well, we're building a DNA culture which insists upon the former, and eventually those people move on.
Do you think the whole approach of the way that call routing works sort of stands against that? Because, you know, the automatic call distributor was very useful technology when it came in the 70s and 80s. But it almost guaranteed that you routed to the person who'd been waiting longest, the agent, which almost said that you were almost certainly going to speak to a different person every time. And I wonder if that stands in the way of that cycle, that if you perhaps always got routed to the last person you spoke to, if they're available, you could then build up some sort of rapport, and there'd be some sort of positive feedback rather than what I do doesn't make any difference, it's just another person on the phone.
Certainly. I mean, you know, I could just be a person that's exhausted from the pressure of that and back into what's the point stuff. I mean, burnout, in other words. That's perfectly understandable. And what I'm saying is I think the leadership have to do something. I mean, in the old days when we used to run call centres, all the team leaders had this honour job. It wasn't mandated, that they'd scrub their boards down every single day and start and paint new designs for no other reason than to recreate freshness. You know what I mean? We've never done it before. It's called today.
Yeah.
And that's such an important thing, that we have to reinvent the desire to engage. I mean, it's exhausting. I mean, I did 45 minutes, you know, speeches. I'm tired at the end of that because I'm open and I'm communicating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People in the contact centre have to do that 8 hours in a day if they were really reaching out every single time. That's a heck of a demand for people. Now, you can build some stamina on that, but I need refreshing. You know what I mean? I need to be reminded why I'm doing something that matters. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So hugely important, and I don't think we do enough of that. We're always on to the next challenge, the next task. You know, we don't really arrive. So culturally, this is really important stuff. Anyway, there we go. That's one element of it. I know we've got to the top of the hour, but there are other ways of actually getting people into their boots and excited about stuff. So. Share a few things on that, mate?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it brief because I'm conscious of time. But we're seeing a lot of organisations talking about the concept of gamification now. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the term. For me, gamification should be used to drive the right behaviour.
Yes.
So, quick example for you. We have a customer I was talking to recently. They have their particular challenge they came to me with was around getting people to take up post-call surveys. Really low adoption rate of post-call surveys. And they wanted to try and understand how they could change the behaviour of their agents. So they introduced the concept of gamification in the context of, well, we may reward the agent for doing certain things on the call and driving the right behaviour, but actually we'll give them a real large kicker of points in the game, if you like, for getting a customer to take a post-call survey.
Yes.
And we'll give them an even bigger kicker of points if that's a positive survey result. Now, what you've done by doing that is fundamentally change the agent's behaviour from the moment they pick up that phone call. The way in which they treat every phone call from the moment they say good morning to that customer will fundamentally change, because they know that if they can get that person into a survey and get a positive result, that will drive them to the conclusion that they're looking for, which might be top of that leaderboard, or might be winning that weekend to Paris, whatever the driver is around that.
Gives focus.
So gamification for me isn't necessarily about games, it's about driving the right behaviour, either in terms of compliance, collecting data, or driving a differentiated experience for the customer.
And I think the experts, the stuff I've read on it, would say the same thing from another perspective, which is there's no point producing games and rewards that are meaningless to the person and to the intended behaviour. So there's some skill in getting all that matched up as well.
There is,
Okay, so that's the other side of it. We've gone through that very quickly, and we shall hurriedly pass across to John T to busily wrap up for us.
Okay, yeah, well, we're reaching just the top of the hour, so if you can, in the chat room, in 1 or 2 words, type in, what did you like best about today's webinar, if you'd like to type that into the chat room. The presentation slides and a recording of the webinar are going to be available later on, callcentrhelper.com/recorded webinars. We are taking bookings now for the first webinar of 2016, which is, I'll be back here with New Voice Media in Basingstoke, 10 predictions for 2016, and next week we're going to be looking at the call centre of the future. So I'd just like to thank our two speakers, Martin Hill-Wilson, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Jeremy Straker, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
And just if you'd like to fill in the survey as you leave the webinar. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you all again next week. Thank you very much, and goodbye.